There are many countries in the world, and Vietnam is one of the best ones to move to as an expat or a nomad. It's safe, affordable, friendly, and comfortable. But it's not for everyone, and that's okay. My intention is to show what you need to be ready for if you're considering a move to Vietnam, and what you can do about it. We came to Hanoi back in 2022, just a few weeks after the country reopened after COVID, and fell in love with how warm and approachable the people here were. Plus, the vibe of Hanoi kind of reminded us of our childhood in USSR, we're both originally from Russia. All the red flags, uncles and wife beaters playing chess outdoors, the Lenin statues, etc. Not that we're fans, but we did have good childhoods. After Hanoi, we moved to Da Nang, and ended up there for much longer than we had planned, which we found out is a very common thing for foreigners there. But after 2.5 years, we really had to move on, and here are all the reasons why. Vietnam shares the same time zone with Thailand, but sits much farther east. This means the sun rises earlier, much earlier, and sets earlier too. In the summer, the sun sets at around 7, but in winter it can set at 5 p.m., and it will be dark at 6. So there's not as much sunlight in the evening. Plus the mornings are bright early on and often hot by 7 a.m. So unless you like to wake up really early, you won't really get that morning cool. Blackout curtains or sleeping masks help for mornings. SAD lamps, and SAD meaning seasonal affective disorder, help for those long evenings. Otherwise, shift your whole day an hour or two earlier and learn to live with it. I like to walk, for the simple reason that the human body underwent millions of years of evolution to develop the muscular system, which requires movement in order to be healthy. However, in Southeast Asia, walking is not very common. Everyone rides motorbikes, and pedestrians are the lowest in the food chain of everyday traffic, and Vietnam is no exception. So the traffic will never stop for you. I'm sure you've seen many videos with people attempting to cross the road in Vietnam and how intuitive it is, because people will amazingly enough avoid you, but they will almost never stop. Thankfully, the speeds in this country are low. Secondly, funny enough, Vietnam is one of the few countries in Southeast Asia with consistent sidewalks. Except, nobody really uses them for walking. I mean, people do, but it often feels like that's the secondary purpose behind them. The primary purpose is parking, bars, restaurants, or any other businesses expanding their territory onto the sidewalks, construction sites, which there are always a lot in Vietnam, but not walking. And the third thing is, once you have it figured out, there's the honking. People rarely honk at someone, but you may be walking down the road, someone will be approaching the next intersection on their bike, and they will honk their horn right next to you. Now, if you spend a week or two in Vietnam, that's alright, but if you're in Vietnam long term, it can really wear on you mentally and add a lot of stress to your life, especially if you're not from a country where that kind of behavior is widespread. A way to get around it is walk at the right times, dawn or after 7:30. Use riverfronts, parks, or embankments, bridges for long, uninterrupted walks. A good way to do it is ride a bike or take a grab taxi to an area where you're planning to take a walk, and then once you're done, take another grab taxi back. For example, in Da Nang there is a bunch of promenades. The most popular one, of course, is by the ocean near the My An and My He beach area, but there are 2 riverfront promenades, and then there is another beach promenade that is much less known and much less frequented by tourists, and it's located right here. An alternative to that is simply accept that the sidewalk isn't really yours and walk the curb line. When crossing a street, on the other hand, cross it at a steady, slow pace, don't stop midstream, make yourself predictable. Or just yield to anything that has wheels if unsure about your safety. Nowhere in the world have I seen the traffic to be more chaotic than it is here. Maybe in India, but I haven't yet been to India. South and Southeast Asia are generally pretty consistent in driving principles. Whoever's bigger is right, and pedestrians have no rights. In Vietnam, there is another thing, however. If you're not planning to stop, you need to honk your horn, which means that everyone honks their horns all the time. Sometimes it will be an empty road and there will be a guy honking his horn just because he's not planning to stop, even though the streets are completely empty and there is nobody else around. Another thing to keep in mind is the road safety. Traffic laws do exist here, but they're more like flexible guidelines. Most of the time it's just instinctive, but that doesn't mean it's simple, and accidents do happen. Thankfully, the speeds are pretty low in Vietnam generally compared to the neighboring countries, which makes it a bit easier, but anyone can still come out in front of you from pretty much anywhere, no matter which side of the road you're driving on. Sometimes you can feel that stoplights here are mostly for decoration, as are the crosswalk zebras. Cutting people off, not even looking while turning right, running the red light, riding in the oncoming oncoming lane or on the sidewalks is a normal thing here. If you're prone to road rage or are unable to unstick yourself from the rules you have been sticking to all your life, this is definitely not a country for you. It is chaotic, but at the same time strangely functional. People move like schools of fish here. Constant motion, low speed, high awareness. If you hesitate, you cause the problem. You have to relax completely when dealing with traffic here. It's not about the rules, it's about riding slow and going with the flow. I'm definitely grateful to Vietnamese traffic for being able to cross the road anywhere, anytime while walking, and for staying completely calm no matter what happens while riding or driving. A dash cam, insurance, and a good quality full-face helmet with jaw protection are very good things to have here. And if it's still tough, there is always Phuc Quoc or the Con Dao Islands, probably the chillest places in Vietnam, where it is much easier to ride your bike, especially if you have no experience, or even to learn to ride. As a matter of fact, Phuc Quoc is where I learned, so it's not all stressful. And it can actually be quite pleasurable considering how beautiful the country is. Housing quality. In many cities in Vietnam, and in Da Nang specifically, finding a good house or apartment takes work and luck. It's particularly difficult if you're not physically there, because there may be things that may create discomforts, such as most washing machines are top-loading and have no hot cycle. Many apartments, although furnished, don't actually have much furniture, so you may be pressed for shelves or wardrobes, couches, and other little details that matter. Insulation is often lacking, which means that you will hear everything your neighbors are doing, and God forbid you have a bar downstairs, but I'll get to that later. Having an oven in your apartment is an exception rather than a rule. Of course, it depends on if you like to cook at home, but we do. Plus, many buildings leak, and considering the fact that the climate in Vietnam is really wet, that can be a problem. A good way to finding a good apartment or a good house is arrive in Vietnam, mark a bunch of places on your map that you think are interesting, get a hotel for a couple of weeks, and physically check each apartment yourself. Don't book long-term from abroad. Photos do lie. When checking apartments, pay particular attention to soundproofing. Come at night to scout out the street situation. Avoid units above or adjacent to open-air bars, gyms, school, clubs, restaurants, pool houses, venues, and the like. Definitely check for mold. Check ceilings, corners for bubbles, fresh paint patches, musty odor, and definitely check inside the ACs. And if things are lacking, you can buy the needed things yourself, like a countertop oven on Shopee if none is available. Most things can be easily ordered on Shopee or Lazada. And if you need to physically check things before you buy them, there are a lot of department stores or malls in just about any major city in Vietnam. Next up is climate and mold. This of course depends on where you are in Vietnam. I would say the further south you go, the more agreeable the climate is, with the notable exception of Saigon, where there are two seasons, really hot and wet. But as far as Da Nang goes, I would say there are three seasons. A cold winter with temperatures dropping down to about 15 Celsius, which is just below 60 Fahrenheit, which actually feels much colder due to all the moisture. A rather pleasant spring, which develops into a really hot and progressively more wet summer that culminates in the rainy season with storms and typhoons frequently hitting the city. It does vary year to year. Some years are much more pleasant than others, and some are much worse, meaning wetter, more typhoons, etc. The sky gets pretty epic though, and that's actually pretty cool. And the sunsets, when they come, are absolutely gorgeous. But the climate is really turbulent overall. And wet, as I mentioned. And I did mention mold already, but what I haven't mentioned is that mold can get everywhere. In the AC, on the clothing, on the walls, everywhere. So you always have to be vigilant, because it can and will create respiratory problems at some point, as happened to me with mold having gotten inside the AC. Definitely get a couple of dehumidifiers per bedroom or living room, set the ACs on dry mode whenever possible, and clean filters as often as possible. Another thing that will really help protect your stuff is the moisture absorbers. You can put them in wardrobes, shoe cabinets, drawers, etc. And then for smaller stuff like camera bags or laptop bags, you can get a bunch of silica gel bags that will also help protect your equipment. For cleaning, there are pretty much only two things that help with mold. That's white vinegar for routine cleaning, and bleach, diluted of course, for visible mold. And remember, never mix vinegar and bleach. That's just good advice. Privacy. Vietnam is dense and very communal. Privacy is not really a thing here. Crowded cafes, scooters brushing past you on sidewalks, loud family gatherings next door that spill into the street. If something interesting happens, everyone will gather to watch, but if you're from a culture that values quiet alone time, it can feel suffocating. For instance, I was the only child born to my parents with no full siblings of a similar age, which means I essentially grew up alone in a large apartment in the middle of Moscow. So this was a real adjustment for me. Vietnam, though, is definitely a community culture. Being visible is a big thing here. People open the curtains on the lower floor of their houses and just hang out watching TV for everyone to see. In the apartment building we lived in, it was not uncommon for Vietnamese neighbors to just keep their doors wide open at all times, kids running around and everything. People here value visibility, open doors, open windows, open curtains. It's about community and connection. That signals normal life. Solitude and locked doors, on the other hand, can look a little strange, even suspicious. Now, if you're from a culture that treats privacy as a boundary, this can feel invasive. But here, curiosity is connection, not intrusion. This can lead to some funny stories, though. In Hanoi, for example, we stayed in a loft apartment, where the elevator opened right into the apartment. This was actually pretty awesome because you come out of the elevator, put your slippers on, and you're right there. Except the elevator didn't really have a ding when it stopped. We didn't think anything of it until in the morning my wife Masha was prancing about half naked, and then the elevator opened with a cleaning lady staring right at her, and Masha going "Blyat," which is an obscene interjection in Russian. Then this other time in the same apartment we were going at it as pretty much any healthy couple does once in a while, and then we hear "Xin chào," which just means hello in Vietnamese. I didn't really speak any Vietnamese at the time, so I just yelled out "busy," but the cleaning lady didn't speak any English, so I had to peek my head out and try to explain with my hands that she needs to come back later. We did agree on a time with her afterwards, but those little incidents got us wondering. I'm guessing people do it late at night here when everyone else is sleeping and it's uncommon during waking hours. I'm not sure. But yeah, it can get weird. If you're a foreigner, people can come up to you and grab you to take photos with them. They think it's fun and innocent, but it doesn't feel that great. It's less common in places like Da Nang where people are used to foreigners, but it happened to us in Talat and in Bana Hills. So yeah, privacy is not really a thing in Vietnam. If you have cleaning staff in your building, then set good hours in advance with them and let them know that this is important for you. Otherwise, maintain your own boundaries politely and you'll be fine. And by the way, if you made it this far and you're still watching, it probably means that you're generally curious about living abroad. Give this video a like, it will help the channel grow, and subscribe if you would like to know more about living abroad as an expat or a nomad. Next, air pollution and burning plastic. The air in Vietnam is not always bad. Some cities are better than others though, like Hanoi is infamous for its poor air quality, but Da Nang is generally not that bad. But when it does get bad, you notice. On some days in Da Nang, for instance, the air can get that distinct chemical smoke. That would be plastic burning somewhere nearby. Sometimes it's a neighbor burning trash, sometimes it's a whole dumpster on fire. That does happen. Sometimes it's agricultural burning from the outskirts of the city or from farther north or west during crop season. It can even come from one of the neighboring countries. It's not constant here, some months are perfectly fine, but it can happen in spring most often. Definitely use an app like IQ Air to monitor the air quality index for PM 2.5. Shut windows if it's over 50. Use an air purifier indoors, that definitely helps. Also, masks help for particularly smoky days. This was actually common all over Asia before COVID had even existed. I'm not gonna start the whole liberal conservative thing, I'm neither, but if you're weird about wearing a mask, just remember this is just to protect your lungs from the crappy air. Vietnam has very high levels of noise pollution. You'll hear it right away. It's the honking, the vendors on bikes. At night, it's the bars and the parties blasting their music all over the neighborhood, often spreading into the adjacent neighborhoods. Families will put huge speakers outside to sing karaoke for all to hear, and sometimes they will compete with each other for loudness. Bars will have large groups of people screaming "Hi, bye, ya! Hi, bye, ya!" over and over again. And it really doesn't matter if there are noise regulations. There actually are. We moved into a quiet building initially, but then a couple of bars opened downstairs and they really didn't care about being adjacent to a residential building. If that happens, you may as well look for a new place. Of course, you can go downstairs and complain and people will smile at you and be really nice and they will turn down the music when you ask, but the next night, and sometimes the next hour, things will go right back to loud music. Until very late, and that's usually between 1 or 2 in the morning. And if you live in a major city where there are major events sometimes, like Nha Trang or Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, and if there happens to be a big music event, you may as well stay up until it's over, because I don't know of earplugs that will drown out that amount of bass. And in the morning it's construction time, which usually starts around 7 a.m. in the morning, so it's consistently very loud all over. At the same time, in many buildings, the walls are rather thin, and the windows don't seal well, bleeding the outside sound right into your apartment. Sure, you can move further out of the city where there are fewer bars or music events and less construction, but you're never insured against honking, parties, and family karaoke. In the end, It feels like you can never get any quiet alone time, and over time it can really wear on you mentally. Of course, like I said, it depends on your own background, priorities, and personality, but in our case, the noise levels are what did it. You can always move farther out of the city. You can also invest in good earplugs. I highly recommend the Moldex or the Earbuddy brand, which you can get on Amazon. It is possible to move to quieter areas of the country, such as Qingdao or Fuquoc, but karaoke can happen anytime, anywhere. But in the end, you need to understand that silence here is temporary. Vietnam runs on noise. It's part of what makes it alive. Vietnam is one of the most fascinating and welcoming countries in the world, and it's also quite beautiful. There are many reasons to move to Vietnam, and I have a video exactly on that. I also have a video on things that make Vietnam unique, which creates new experiences and memories that can be cherished all your life. And if you spend some time living in Vietnam and face some of the things that I'm talking about in this video and have your own recipes of dealing with them, please leave them in the comments. And of course, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to this channel for a lot more about living abroad as an expat or a nomad. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one.